"Clean up this liability," Elias ordered, his voice echoing over the hired orchestra as he threw the signed divorce papers at my feet. The paper fluttering down next to the simple platinum wedding band I was required to wear for the terms of the inheritance. A painful reminder that my 2 years of servitude were purely a transactional sacrifice to secure the Blackwood Group fortune through this very ring, which he mistakenly believed held only sentimental value, but which I needed to keep secure until my 25th birthday, which happened to be today. The flash of Veronica Sterling's diamonds blinded me as she stepped forward, the smugness on her perfectly sculpted face a sickening mask of triumph, proving that the betrayal I had tolerated for months had finally reached its sickening climax just hours before I could finally be free from their upper-class tyranny. Elias, the man I married but never loved, stood over me like I was a piece of trash he had accidentally tracked into his sprawling Manhattan penthouse. And I knew this public humiliation was his preemptive strike, meant to break me before I could react to the official divorce filing. A way for him to claim I was the emotionally unstable one in court. Preparing the psychological grounds for the asylum trap he thought would legally silence me forever and force me to relinquish the remaining keys to my power. Before I could even process the acidic burn of the papers landing on my silk gown, Veronica delivered the final, calculated blow, grabbing the $6,000 bottle of vintage Chateau Margaux from a passing waiter and splashing the entire contents, a thick, dark red stain, directly onto my face and hair. The sweet liquid stinging my eyes as she sneered. "Happy birthday, gold digger. Hope you choke on the cheap wine you used to drink in the gutter." My mind registered the smell of the expensive Bordeaux and the sudden silence of the 100 guests more clearly than the sting. The quiet instantly transforming the ballroom into a hostile arena where I was the main spectacle of a rich people firing squad. And I tasted the metallic bitterness of my own resentment. Knowing they believed this crude public shaming would crush the poor Serafina Vance they thought I was. The logic was clear. Elias needed me gone before the market closed, before Blackwood's internal clock officially declared me the full owner, which was why this rush to humiliate me publicly had been so desperately executed, giving the public a clean narrative of a low-class con artist being justly thrown out, a move that would immediately destroy my credibility if I dared to fight back later. I forced my gaze past the red stain dripping onto the pristine white marble floor and locked eyes with Elias, his own pupils dilated with a mixture of anger and desperation. A look that told me he was aware his time was running out to find the true secret of the ring. The inheritance he was so convinced was his birthright. That misplaced confidence was his blind spot. The fatal flaw in his arrogance, because he saw me as a replaceable asset, a mere liability to be liquidated, not the quiet cipher who had been watching his every move and every digital transaction for the last 24 months. Waiting patiently for the final chime of the midnight clock, the moment the divorce document touched the floor, the microchip hidden in the platinum band pulsed once beneath the skin of my finger, confirming the full activation of the Blackwood protocols, an inheritance I needed to secure to find the real killer of my father. A person I strongly suspected was someone in the Thorn inner circle. The realization that I was now fully unchained sent a terrifying jolt of power through me, burning away the shame like dry ice. And I knew the time for the long game was over. It was time for the instant slap. Elias didn't even give me a second to move, snapping his fingers at the two massive security guards. Two men named Duke and Rex, who were paid handsomely to handle his messy cleanup operations, get her out of the building. And make sure she is checked into the Northwood facility by dawn, Elias commanded. The casual use of the word facility, a thinly veiled reference to the private psychiatric institution notorious for holding the secrets of the New York elite. a place where people disappeared quietly, ensuring my enforced silence via the asylum trap. I knew I couldn't allow them to touch me. Not now. Not when the full force of Blackwood was finally mine. The security guards advanced, their steps heavy on the marble, their large, manicured hands reaching for my arms, ready to physically drag the liability out into the cold, New York night. As the first guard's fingers grazed my skin, my voice, calm and impossibly low, cut through the tense, hushed room, a sound so unexpected it made the guard momentarily pause. "Don't touch me," I said. The words, a quiet declaration of war. Immediately turning to the event manager, a trembling man named Gary, who was watching the scene unfold in horror. I reached into the stained silk gown, pulling out a small, sleek black titanium card, the kind only used by the upper echelons of the most powerful financial institutions, something Elias had never even seen. I held the card out to the manager. "Your entire team's access key has just been revoked by Blackwood Security," I stated, watching his eyes widen as he looked at the card, the full realization of what was happening dawning on his face. Elias's phone then began to buzz incessantly, the sound suddenly jarring in the silence. He pulled the device out and his face, previously rigid with superiority, crumpled into a mask of pure terror as he read the screen. "What is this? Stock drop. 30% in 10 minutes. Impossible," he muttered, glancing at me with dawning suspicion, an unshakable tremor of doubt finally cracking his veneer of power. The logic of the situation making his blood run cold as he realized his poor wife might have something to do with the economic hit. Veronica tried to regain control of the room, shouting at the top of her lungs. "It's a bluff. She's mentally unstable. Elias, don't believe the oxygen thief." Her taunt was instantly countered not by my words, but by the subtle, yet perceptible change in the demeanor of the 100 guests, who were now nervously checking their own investment apps, suddenly fearing they might be caught in the financial crossfire of a Blackwood liquidation. I took a slow, deliberate step back from the divorce papers, the platinum ring pulsing faintly on my finger, completing its final authorization cycle, feeling the full, crushing weight of my inherited power settle over me. The power I had pretended to be too weak to wield for 2 years. Elias, still staring at his phone, stammered a weak demand for the security guards to finish their job. But before Duke or Rex could take another step, a sharp, authoritative voice boomed from the doorway, silencing even Veronica. "The security detail for Mr. Thorne has been replaced. Please exit the premises immediately. Lucian Moreau, my designated protector and the chief operating officer of the Blackwood Group," stepped into the light, flanked by 2 of his own armed, black-suited agents, men who were obviously not the local NYPD but something far more dangerous. Lucian ignored Elias and walked directly toward me, reaching down with a clean white handkerchief to gently wipe the dripping wine from my chin. An act of quiet deference that immediately signaled the shift in my status from scorned wife to untouchable CEO. I didn't need to fight. My power was doing the heavy lifting. I looked directly at Elias, who was frantically scrolling through the catastrophic news alerts on his phone. The public shaming he had intended for me instantly forgotten by the far more urgent humiliation of corporate failure. The time for explanation was over, and the only logic that mattered now was absolute power. I raised my chin, ignoring the sticky residue of Veronica's arrogance, and gave Elias one final, cold smile of utter contempt. "I don't need your papers, Elias, and I don't need your family's scraps," I stated, the quiet confidence in my voice freezing him in place. I pointed a perfectly manicured finger at the divorce document lying on the floor. "The prenup you forced me to sign had one fatal, legally binding flaw. I continued, my gaze sweeping across the stunned crowd, driving home the reality that their puppet had cut her strings. I turned and walked past Elias, Lucian's agents clearing the path for me as if I were royalty, leaving the stunned members of the Thorn elite trapped in their own collapsing tower of lies and debt. I walked toward the main exit, knowing the financial collapse of the Thorn Empire was only beginning. The shame was gone, replaced by a ruthless, absolute focus on vengeance. I paused only once, turning my head slightly toward the man who had forced me into 2 years of silent torment. My voice, now carrying the weight of billions of dollars and a thirst for justice, was the final, devastating pronouncement of my unchaining. Enjoy your last 24 hours of ownership, Elias. Blackwood is coming for you. The scent of stale champagne and utter panic clung to the air in the Thorne family penthouse, a stark contrast to the sterile calm of the Blackwood war room, where I stood watching the financial ruin unfold on 6 massive screens, my silk gown having been replaced by a sharply tailored suit. The uniform of absolute power. 35% down. Serafina. We have triggered the circuit breaker. It is the beginning of the end for Thorne Consolidated, Lucian Moreau reported, his voice devoid of emotion. Exactly how I liked my assets and my allies. I watched Elias Thorne on the silent video feed, pacing like a caged animal, ripping off his designer tie as his mother. Eleanor shrieked accusations at him, their family drama now playing out for the amusement of my Blackwood team. The Thorne logic was always flawed. They believed they could control me through humiliation and legal threats, never grasping that the true shackle was my own silence, my need to keep the platinum ring the key to my inheritance secure until my 25th birthday, which now had arrived, unleashing Cypher on their fragile empire. The clock is still ticking. Lucian, I want to accelerate the margin call, I commanded, staring at the feed where Elias was blaming Veronica for the fiasco, his voice cracking with fear as he realized he might lose his precious company. Eleanor, the matriarch who once called me a gutter rat to my face, grabbed Elias's arm, her voice a desperate, hissing whisper that only intensified my resolve. She is nothing. Elias. A nobody. It's impossible for her to orchestrate a market crash. You failed in the Silverstream deal. Not her. That was their fatal flaw. Their continuing blind spot. They focused on their own petty internal failures, utterly incapable of comprehending the strategic depth of Blackwood, or the power of the cipher they had slept next to for 2 years, clinging to the comforting delusion that their poor wife was simply too weak or too stupid to retaliate. The thought of their self-destruction was a pure hit of dopamine, satisfying my thirst for justice more than any physical blow could have. Lucian paused, his eyes fixed on me with professional concern, noting the rapid acceleration of the attack. The urgency is understood, Serafina, but the board meeting is scheduled in 1 hour. If we move too fast, we lose the legal high ground. They need to believe the collapse is organic, not a hostile liquidation, he stated, maintaining the logic and timing I had meticulously crafted. The purpose of this whole ordeal, my 2-year imprisonment in the gilded cage, was to gain the legal leverage. Not just the money, I reminded him, my voice carrying the weight of the 2 years I spent enduring their insults, their constant reminder that I was merely a placeholder, an investment that hadn't paid off. The Giat Nuak Tran Lai was Elias attempting to use the state's mental health system, the asylum trap, to permanently erase me from the legal and financial landscape. And that act, which exposed his pure, unadulterated ruthlessness, had shattered the very necessity for my silence. I checked my phone, confirming the coordinates for Alexander's safety box were still secure. The silent logic of my son's protection, the core reason for my continuing shackle. I needed Blackwood's full protection and resources to keep the boy hidden from the darker forces that had killed my father and were still hunting his inheritance. Forces that Elias himself would later prove to be an unwitting pawn of. I grabbed the evidence briefcase. The board meeting is my stage. Lucien, let them feel the crash. And then I'll deliver the final verdict. I cut the feed, focusing my mind entirely on the confrontation to come. The Thorne Consolidated Executive Conference Room was a monument to old money and desperate attempts to cling to relevance, the air thick with the smell of expensive leather and masculine fear. When I entered, the 7 men of the board, including Elias and Eleanor, stopped mid-sentence, their faces a mixture of confusion and open hostility. "What is this liability doing here, security? Get her out. She is no longer family," Eleanor Thorne immediately commanded, trying to assert her dwindling authority, pointing a trembling finger at my chest. The logic in her voice was still the same. I was dirt, and I had no right to be in the same room with their millions. I ignored her, walking past the massive oak table to the only empty seat, the one traditionally reserved for the controlling shareholder. "I am here because you are conducting a meeting concerning an asset in which I hold controlling interest," I said calmly, placing the titanium briefcase on the table. The metallic click silencing the entire room. Elias, still pale and sweating, finally found his voice, shaking his head in confusion. "You have nothing. Serafina, our prenup gave you 0 shares and a $500,000 severance. You're a gold digger who failed to mine the gold." He scoffed, desperately clinging to the legal documents he believed gave him absolute protection. His words perfectly encapsulated his tuong and the reason he had underestimated me so thoroughly. Believing I cared about his pitiful $500,000, I smiled, a cold, predatory curving of my lips that made the blood drain from Elias's face. "The $500,000 severance a bad investment for you, Elias? Because you breached the single most important clause," I stated, the quiet accusation hanging heavy in the room. I opened the briefcase, not to reveal stock certificates, but a stack of documents copies of Elias's extravagant spending, his communication with Veronica, and most importantly, the notarized paperwork confirming his violation of the moral clause due to his documented adultery in New York State. The logic was devastatingly simple. His own vice was the ultimate weapon against him. "You violated the terms of the marital contract, which instantly voided the prenup's financial restrictions. And surprisingly, Elias, you also signed a second, much more creative contract 21 months ago." I reached into the case and pulled out a single, thin document with the ominous Blackwood Group logo discreetly printed in the corner. "This is not a separation agreement. This is a promissory note for $1.2 billion, I announced. The number, $1.2 billion, hanging in the air like a death sentence. Thorne Consolidated had cash flow issues after the Silverstream failure, a fact Eleanor kept hidden. You approached a financial institution for an emergency loan, and they were happy to oblige. That institution was the Blackwood Group." The board members gasped simultaneously, the sound of their collective terror giving me a perverse thrill. Elias stared at the document, utterly defeated. "Impossible. I signed that under the name Orion Ventures. They said it was a third-party intermediary, a shell company," he whispered, finally seeing the edges of the financial trap I, the cipher, had laid months into our miserable marriage. The time when I was still gathering evidence and waiting for the inheritance clock to strike. "Orion Ventures is a holding shell of Blackwood, Elias. And that note was structured as a 0-day default loan," I explained, simplifying the complex financial destruction to one chilling sentence. "You missed a single payment 2 days ago. a strategic oversight I orchestrated, which gives the lender me the right to call the entire loan due immediately. I looked at him, not with anger, but with the ruthless indifference of a corporate executioner. The debt, plus interest and penalties, is now due. I am formally activating the margin call. I handed a document to the only independent board member, a man named Mr. Hamilton, who was visibly shaking. This document grants Blackwood the right to take over all primary assets of Thorne Consolidated as collateral for the outstanding $1.5 billion debt, effective immediately. The number had gone up, the extra penalty a cruel twist of the financial knife. Elias lunged across the table, his face distorted with rage, screaming that it was a fraud, a setup, a conspiracy. "You can't do this. You are a fraud. A damaged good that should have been thrown out years ago," he roared. His attempts to physically attack me instantly thwarted by Lucian, who appeared from the corner of the room with two Blackwood security agents, their presence a silent, lethal warning. "We are doing it, Elias, and it's all legal. Courtesy of the state's most ironclad loan covenant." I corrected him, maintaining eye contact, making him swallow his own fear and hatred. Eleanor, seeing the complete financial devastation, collapsed into her chair. Her attempts to use the family lawyers instantly blocked by a simultaneous communication from my legal team, confirming that Blackwood had already placed a temporary restraining order on all Thorne assets pending the full liquidation. The logic was absolute. They were bound by their own legal arrogance. The family was imploding right there. A symphony of shouting and accusations as the board members began to realize they were facing ruin. I stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. The end of the Thorne era. My hand brushed against the platinum ring, the source of my power and the symbol of the unbearable conditions I had endured. Elias, realizing his position was hopeless, tried one last, desperate plea, a flash of genuine human fear crossing his face. "Serafina, please, think about what your father would say. You're destroying a legacy. I can fix this. I can give you the world." He thought appealing to emotion would work. His final, pathetic misjudgment. I paused at the door, turning back to the ruins of their power, delivering my final, cold judgment. My father would say, "Always liquidate a bad investment before it drains your net worth," I quoted, the chilling familiarity of the phrase making Elias stumble back. He instantly recognized the quote from the few times my father had met him. Realizing the depth of the deception and the utter lack of genuine affection in our marriage, his mind was racing, trying to connect me, his poor wife, with the powerful, terrifying Blackwood group. "It's not over," Elias whispered, grabbing the desk for support. "I still have my media contacts. I will expose you as the corporate shark you are. I will destroy your reputation and prove you are unfit to own Blackwood." His voice was filled with a last-ditch threat of public shaming and legal retaliation. I didn't dignify the threat with a response. Instead, Lucian leaned down and whispered something in Elias's ear, a secret piece of information that caused Elias to recoil, as if he had been physically struck. His eyes wide with a new, crippling fear that superseded even his financial collapse. "The Blackwood Group is currently reviewing the evidence linking your mother to the tampering of the brakes on the private jet 3 years ago. Elias, the plane crash that killed Serafina's father. This is no longer a corporate issue. This is a homicide investigation, and your mother is our primary target." The revelation hung in the air, transforming the corporate failure into a sickening realization of murder and family conspiracy. I walked out, leaving the boardroom in chaos. The final, lethal blow delivered not by a stock ticker, but by the threat of criminal prosecution, The air in the press conference room reeked of cheap floral arrangements and Veronica Sterling's desperate perfume. A stark, vulgar contrast to the scent of burnt money that now clung to Elias Thorne's bankrupt empire. Veronica, dressed in a custom-made dress that screamed, "Engaged billionaire's fiancé," stood behind a podium plastered with a cartoon image of me, labeled Gold Digger, her smile brittle and rehearsed. Completely oblivious to the fact that her fiancé's company had been liquidated mere hours ago. I watched the live feed from the Blackwood Mobile Command Center, Lucian reviewing the final asset seizure documents while I observed the final, pathetic attempt by Veronica to maintain relevance. Her ignorance was a deliberate strategic choice on my part. I needed her hubris to be fully inflated before I plunged the legal dagger. The only thing keeping me here, forcing me to endure this public sham, was the cold, hard logic of the situation. I needed to discredit the Thorne narrative before the media could pick up on any hint of my true Blackwood identity. A detail I would reveal on my terms. I am here today to expose the true criminal behind the Thorne family tragedy, Veronica announced. Her voice pitched high for maximum emotional effect, the cameras flashing wildly. Serafina Vance is nothing more than a liability, a 2-year bad investment who tried to sabotage our family and steal my fiancé. She's a manipulative, damaged good from the wrong side of the tracks. A low-class oxygen thief who belongs back in the gutter she crawled out of. Every word she spoke. Every class-based insult designed to trigger public sympathy for the rich victim was a calculated risk. A brick she laid in her own prison cell. She presented fabricated evidence of my reckless spending and emotional instability, reinforcing Elias's earlier attempt to use the asylum trap to silence me. Her performance was impeccable, weaving a narrative that painted me as the sole cause of the Thorne Company's sudden financial collapse, not the legitimate hostile takeover I had executed. I waited until the moment Veronica paused for dramatic effect, letting the camera lights bask in her tearful performance. That was my cue. I walked through the side doors, flanked only by my security detail. 2 figures who melted into the crowd as I approached the podium. I didn't rush, letting the initial shock and the renewed flurry of camera flashes wash over me. Veronica's face froze, transforming from tearful victim to wide-eyed, spitting fury. "Get out. You are interrupting my press conference, security," she shrieked, forgetting her composure instantly. The few Thorne security guards left were hesitant, their earpieces silent, having already been deactivated by Lucian's network sweep. "I'm merely here to co-chair, Veronica," I said, my voice cutting through the noise, low and steady, a calming tone that belied the absolute ruthlessness of my intent. I pulled a small flash drive from my suit pocket and calmly handed it to a technician near the main screen. "You accuse me of being a gold digger, but you, dear Veronica, are simply a poor investor in bad merchandise," I continued, the public shaming already beginning. On the massive screen behind Veronica, a high-resolution, time-stamped montage of her clandestine meetings with a married competitor of Elias, along with bank transfer receipts totaling $750,000, began to play. The dates correlated perfectly with the final critical days of the Thorne-Silverstream bidding war, the very failure Eleanor had just blamed Elias for. The room erupted. Veronica turned and saw the incriminating evidence, her public mask shattering completely. She grabbed the nearest object, a heavy microphone, and flung it at the screen, causing a loud crack as the glass shattered. The fury was palpable. An act of unhinged desperation that was exponentially more convincing than my instability could ever be. I watched the rage on her face, realizing that the logic of her betrayal was simple. She was an internal threat, hired by a rival to bleed Thorne dry from the inside. Her love for Elias merely an accessory to her real financial motive. It was just sex. You trash. It meant nothing. You can't ruin me, Veronica screamed, completely exposing her own shallow core, the very admission I needed. Ruin you? I don't need to ruin you, Veronica. Your own actions already served the moral clause that annihilated Elias's prenup protection and gave Blackwood the legal right to liquidate everything he owned, I replied, simplifying the complex financial legal move into one devastating sentence. And as for the $750,000 you took from Mr. Davies, I believe that is called corporate espionage, not a gold digger transaction. The difference is the felony. I turned to the cameras. Thorne Consolidated failed due to internal corruption, not the whims of an emotionally unstable ex-wife. Now, get your liability off the stage. Just as Veronica was being physically restrained by her own handlers, who were now trying to cover the massive screen, Eleanor Thorne, Elias's mother, burst through the same side door I had used. She wasn't dressed for a press event. She wore a coat and clutched a leather handbag, her face a ghastly shade of gray. She had clearly been trying to make a run for it, fleeing the criminal charges Lucian had just whispered to Elias. She caught sight of me and, driven by blind panic, rushed toward me, her hand raised. You pathetic little witch! You will not destroy my son. You won't take my legacy. Before she could reach me, Eleanor, driven by pure rage, lunged, attempting a physical assault. In a split second, I sidestepped her lunge, and she stumbled, grabbing the edge of the podium to steady herself. As she did, she inadvertently knocked over the only thing left standing on the table, a mug of piping hot, freshly brewed coffee. The scalding liquid flew through the air, but instead of hitting me, it sprayed directly across Veronica Sterling's already hysterical face, making her shriek in pain and anger. The accidental violence was brutal. Two antagonists destroying each other while I stood perfectly still. I felt a fleeting, bitter satisfaction. Eleanor's violent attempt to cover up a murder had only resulted in hurting her accomplice's daughter. A fitting, ugly symmetry of their own toxicity. Eleanor stared at the chaos she had caused, her breath hitching. Her escape attempt utterly thwarted by her own rage and the dozens of cameras now trained on her face. You wanted to know the truth, Elias, I called out, knowing he was watching this meltdown somewhere. I looked straight into the lens, ensuring the message was delivered clearly, a final clarification of the long, silent game I had played. The true motivation for my 2 years of suffering. I never cared about your money, Elias. I married you because I needed the tin vat, this platinum ring, to unlock my inheritance and gain the power of Blackwood. I held up the ring for the cameras to see, letting the jewel's simple design contrast sharply with the millions of dollars currently on the line. I needed to control Blackwood to ensure the people who murdered my father for his assets would be utterly destroyed and have their names legally erased. Elias was simply the lock. And you, Eleanor, you are the key to the final execution, I stated, drawing the ultimate connection. I didn't need to elaborate on the plane crash, the implication of premeditated murder. Combined with the evidence of financial fraud and corporate espionage, was enough to sink the entire family structure. Eleanor collapsed to her knees, the realization that her dark secret was now being broadcast globally shattering her composure. She wasn't crying. She was hyperventilating, her eyes fixed on the retreating figure of Veronica, who was being dragged away, screaming about the burns on her face. The irony was sweet and potent. The one trying to flee justice had accidentally inflicted the most physical damage on her own side. I left the scene, the triumphant sound of reporters shouting questions and the desperate wails of the Thorne family echoing behind me, as I stepped outside into the clear New York day. Lucian was waiting, handing me a small, encrypted tablet detailing the next step. Eleanor is in the wind. Serafina. She bypassed the security perimeter. She must have had a private escape route, Lucian stated, his expression grim. But we just intercepted a signal. Elias, your ex-husband, is trying to contact a third party, attempting to trade information he thinks is damaging to Blackwood for safe passage. I took the tablet. The warmth of the device a contrast to the icy certainty in my heart. Elias was still trying to save his own skin, still focused on leverage over loyalty. Let him make the trade. Lucian, let him think he has a lifeline. I need to know who is desperate enough to deal with the remnants of the Thorn failure. I scrolled through the communication log, the encrypted text revealing a name I hadn't heard in years, a name connected to the very core of my father's enemies. Marcus Sterling, Veronica's father, the man who had lost billions to Blackwood 20 years ago, was the one Elias was negotiating with. The message ended with an ominous final sentence that made the blood run cold in my veins, forcing the fear I had suppressed for years to surface instantly. The trade is set for tonight. Cipher. Sterling's payment. He wants the platinum ring. And your son. The air in the press conference room reeked of cheap floral arrangements and Veronica Sterling's desperate perfume. A stark, vulgar contrast to the scent of burnt money that now clung to Elias Thorne's bankrupt empire. Veronica, dressed in a custom-made dress that screamed, "Engaged billionaire's fiancé," stood behind a podium plastered with a cartoon image of me labeled Gold Digger, her smile brittle and rehearsed. Completely oblivious to the fact that her fiancé's company had been liquidated mere hours ago. I watched the live feed from the Blackwood Mobile Command Center, Lucian reviewing the final asset seizure documents while I observed the final, pathetic attempt by Veronica to maintain relevance. Her ignorance was a deliberate strategic choice on my part. I needed her hubris to be fully inflated before I plunged the legal dagger. The only thing keeping me here, forcing me to endure this public sham, was the cold, hard logic of the situation. I needed to discredit the Thorn narrative before the media could pick up on any hint of my true Blackwood identity. A detail I would reveal on my terms. I am here today to expose the true criminal behind the Thorn family tragedy, Veronica announced. Her voice pitched high for maximum emotional effect, the cameras flashing wildly. Serafina Vance is nothing more than a liability, a 2-year bad investment who tried to sabotage our family and steal my fiancé. She's a manipulative, damaged good from the wrong side of the tracks. A low-class oxygen thief who belongs back in the gutter she crawled out of. Every word she spoke, every class-based insult designed to trigger public sympathy for the rich victim, was a calculated risk. A brick she laid in her own prison cell. She presented fabricated evidence of my reckless spending and emotional instability, reinforcing Elias's earlier attempt to use the asylum trap to silence me. Her performance was impeccable, weaving a narrative that painted me as the sole cause of the Thorn Company's sudden financial collapse, not the legitimate hostile takeover I had executed. I waited until the moment Veronica paused for dramatic effect, letting the camera lights bask in her tearful performance. That was my cue. I walked through the side doors, flanked only by my security detail, 2 figures who melted into the crowd as I approached the podium. I didn't rush, letting the initial shock and the renewed flurry of camera flashes wash over me. Veronica's face froze, transforming from tearful victim to wide-eyed, spitting fury. "Get out! You are interrupting my press conference security," she shrieked, forgetting her composure instantly. The few Thorn security guards left were hesitant, their earpieces silent, having already been deactivated by Lucian's network sweep. "I'm merely here to co-chair, Veronica," I said, my voice cutting through the noise. low and steady, a calming tone that belied the absolute ruthlessness of my intent. I pulled a small flash drive from my suit pocket and calmly handed it to a technician near the main screen. You accuse me of being a gold digger, but you, dear Veronica, are simply a poor investor in bad merchandise. I continued, the public shaming already beginning. On the massive screen behind Veronica, a high-resolution, time-stamped montage of her clandestine meetings with a married competitor of Elias, along with bank transfer receipts totaling $750,000, began to play. The dates correlated perfectly with the final critical days of the Thorne-Silverstream bidding war, the very failure Eleanor had just blamed Elias for. The room erupted. Veronica turned and saw the incriminating evidence, her public mask shattering completely. She grabbed the nearest object, a heavy microphone, and flung it at the screen, causing a loud crack as the glass shattered. The fury was palpable, an act of unhinged desperation that was exponentially more convincing than my instability could ever be. I watched the rage on her face, realizing that the logic of her betrayal was simple. She was an internal threat, hired by a rival to bleed Thorne dry from the inside. Her love for Elias merely an accessory to her real financial motive. It was just sex. You trash. It meant nothing. You can't ruin me, Veronica screamed, completely exposing her own shallow core, the very admission I needed. Ruin you? I don't need to ruin you, Veronica. Your own actions already served the moral clause that annihilated Elias's prenup protection and gave Blackwood the legal right to liquidate everything he owned, I replied, simplifying the complex financial legal move into one devastating sentence. And as for the $750,000 you took from Mr. Davies, I believe that is called corporate espionage, not a gold digger transaction. The difference is the felony. I turned to the cameras. Thorne Consolidated failed due to internal corruption, not the whims of an emotionally unstable ex-wife. Now, get your liability off the stage. Just as Veronica was being physically restrained by her own handlers, who were now trying to cover the massive screen, Eleanor Thorne, Elias's mother, burst through the same side door I had used. She wasn't dressed for a press event. She wore a coat and clutched a leather handbag, her face a ghastly shade of gray. She had clearly been trying to make a run for it, fleeing the criminal charges Lucian had just whispered to Elias. She caught sight of me and, driven by blind panic, rushed toward me, her hand raised. You pathetic little witch. You will not destroy my son. You won't take my legacy. Before she could reach me, Eleanor, driven by pure rage, lunged, attempting a physical assault. In a split second, I sidestepped her lunge, and she stumbled, grabbing the edge of the podium to steady herself. As she did, she inadvertently knocked over the only thing left standing on the table, a mug of piping hot, freshly brewed coffee. The scalding liquid flew through the air, but instead of hitting me, it sprayed directly across Veronica Sterling's already hysterical face, making her shriek in pain and anger. The accidental violence was brutal, two antagonists destroying each other while I stood perfectly still. I felt a fleeting, bitter satisfaction. Eleanor's violent attempt to cover up a murder had only resulted in hurting her accomplice's daughter, a fitting, ugly symmetry of their own toxicity. Eleanor stared at the chaos she had caused, her breath hitching, her escape attempt utterly thwarted by her own rage and the dozens of cameras now trained on her face. You wanted to know the truth, Elias, I called out, knowing he was watching this meltdown somewhere. I looked straight into the lens, ensuring the message was delivered clearly, a final clarification of the long, silent game I had played. The true motivation for my 2 years of suffering. I never cared about your money, Elias. I married you because I needed the tin vat this platinum ring to unlock my inheritance and gain the power of Blackwood. I held up the ring for the cameras to see, letting the jewel's simple design contrast sharply with the millions of dollars currently on the line. I needed to control Blackwood to ensure the people who murdered my father for his assets would be utterly destroyed and have their names legally erased. Elias was simply the lock. And you, Eleanor, you are the key to the final execution, I stated, drawing the ultimate connection. I didn't need to elaborate on the plane crash, the implication of premeditated murder. Combined with the evidence of financial fraud and corporate espionage, was enough to sink the entire family structure. Eleanor collapsed to her knees. The realization that her dark secret was now being broadcast globally, shattering her composure. She wasn't crying. She was hyperventilating. Her eyes fixed on the retreating figure of Veronica, who was being dragged away, screaming about the burns on her face. The irony was sweet and potent. The one trying to flee justice had accidentally inflicted the most physical damage on her own side. I left the scene, the triumphant sound of reporters shouting questions and the desperate wails of the Thorne family echoing behind me. As I stepped outside into the clear New York day, Lucian was waiting, handing me a small, encrypted tablet detailing the next step. Eleanor is in the wind. Serafina. She bypassed the security perimeter. She must have had a private escape route, Lucian stated, his expression grim. But we just intercepted a signal. Elias, your ex-husband, is trying to contact a third party, attempting to trade information he thinks is damaging to Blackwood for safe passage. I took the tablet, the warmth of the device a contrast to the icy certainty in my heart. Elias was still trying to save his own skin, still focused on leverage over loyalty. Let him make the trade. Lucian, let him think he has a lifeline. I need to know who is desperate enough to deal with the remnants of the Thorne failure. I scrolled through the communication log, the encrypted text revealing a name I hadn't heard in years, a name connected to the very core of my father's enemies. Marcus Sterling, Veronica's father, the man who had lost billions to Blackwood 20 years ago, was the one Elias was negotiating with. The message ended with an ominous final sentence that made the blood run cold in my veins, forcing the fear I had suppressed for years to surface instantly. The trade is set for tonight. Cipher. Sterling's payment. He wants the platinum ring. And your son. The searing pain in the back of my skull was the first thing that brought me back. A crushing, nauseating throbbing that anchored me to reality. My mouth felt dry and tasted metallic, a consequence of the sedative Marcus Sterling had pumped into the antechamber. I was lying on a cot in a small, windowless room, the air stagnant and cold. The concrete walls reinforcing the agonizing logic of my defeat. I had failed. The tin vat was gone, and my son, Alexander, was now in the hands of one of Blackwood's oldest, most venomous enemies. I fought against the chemical fog, my mind screaming to assess the situation, to find the weakest point in this personalized asylum trap Sterling had constructed. My hands and feet were shackled to the metal cot, the chains a brutal contrast to the soft, expensive fabric of the suit I still wore. Marcus Sterling stood over me, his face gaunt and his eyes burning with a 20-year-old bitterness over the loss of his own empire to my father. He held the platinum ring, my inheritance key, between his thumb and forefinger, examining it with the greedy fascination of a man who believed a single piece of metal held billions of dollars. Welcome back to the land of the living, Serafina Vance. Or should I say, Cipher. He mocked. The use of my code name, a chilling reminder of how deeply he had been tracking my actions, his hand tracing the simple band. You played a smart game, living as that pathetic gold digger wife, enduring the insults of the thorn-damaged goods just for this little chip. But you failed. The ring is mine. And now, the boy is my final, perfect leverage. He confirmed the horrifying truth, turning the intense, internal conflict from corporate survival to an all-consuming maternal rage. You won't get the code. Sterling, I rasped, forcing the words through my dry throat. Ignoring the pain, my voice was weak, but the certainty in my eyes was not. He laughed, a dry, rattling sound. Oh, I will. Elias Thorne was a simple lock. Serafina, you knew the moral clause would liquidate him, so you used him. You are every bit the ruthless oxygen thief your father was. But I am not Elias. I am going to keep you here, pumped full of antipsychotics, while I use this ring to access Blackwood. And your son will be raised as my breeding stock, a new cipher loyal to the Sterling name. His words, stripping away my motherhood and identity, were designed for maximum psychological damage, pushing me to the brink of my emotional tolerance. He pulled out a small syringe, the needle glinting under the weak overhead bulb. The drug is Seroquel, enough to make you a compliant vegetable, perfectly legal in the state of New York if the doctor reports a severe psychotic break. Remember how Elias was going to use the asylum trap? I'm just executing his plan better, he explained, reinforcing the frightening logic of his legally sanctioned cruelty. He grabbed my arm, preparing the injection, his triumph palpable. But before the needle could pierce my skin, the entire bunker shuddered violently, and the overhead lights flickered, dying instantly. The room was plunged into absolute darkness, and the recorded voice system abruptly cut out, leaving a ringing silence that was heavy with surprise and fear. Sterling cursed loudly, dropping the syringe, the small clatter lost in the sudden chaos. "What the hell was that generators get the lights on?" he shouted to his hidden security team, instantly shifting his focus from me to the immediate threat. My own mind, fighting the drug's fog, seized on the opportunity, realizing the power outage wasn't Lucian's meticulous attack, but something far more chaotic. The timing was too random, the failure too complete. It had to be Elias, bumbling and terrified in the utility shaft, attempting to fix his own mistake, an act of blind hoi-han that had, against all logic, become my unexpected saving grace. Your generators are 20 years old, Sterling, just like your business model. I taunted, the distraction working, forcing him to turn his anger back to me instead of the immediate problem. I needed to keep him talking, focused on my words while the darkness concealed Elias's possible movements and gave Lucian the critical opening he needed to bypass the security layers. Blackwood doesn't deal in obsolete tech. Marcus, you think a platinum band holds the future of $100 billion company. It holds nothing but a digital key. The true assets are already protected by firewalls you could never breach. Sterling stormed toward the cot, his footsteps heavy in the dark, the desperation returning to his voice. Lies. The key is the code. Give me the 7-digit biometric code, or I swear, I will bring the boy in here and make you watch as I use him for leverage. He was close now, his breath hot and ragged. The implication of harm to Alexander a brutal escalation that hit me harder than the sedative. I fought the urge to scream, focusing instead on the logic of his financial pain. Why the rush, Marcus? Did the news of Thorne's liquidation hit your residual assets too hard? I countered, aiming for his Achilles heel, his ego, and his fear of poverty. You kidnapped my son because you failed to make an honest dollar. You're not a titan. You're a beggar. The verbal assault was a calculated risk, a way to prolong the confrontation, driving him further away from the main door. Suddenly, A loud, grating krrsh sound echoed from the far end of the hallway, followed by the sickening smell of ozone and burnt metal. It was louder, closer, and more strategic than the previous failure. That sound was the distinct mark of a Blackwood security breaching tool. Lucian was here. Sterling heard it too, his head snapping toward the sound. The Blackwood dogs are here. Get the boy and you lying witch. You will pay for this. He ran out of the room, leaving me shackled but fully alert. The rage, a bitter, burning antidote to the drugs in my system. I immediately began working the restraints, using the few millimeters of slack I had meticulously noted during my capture. Fighting the chains with the focused intensity of a person who knew failure meant the death of everything she held dear. I heard the frantic shouts of Sterling's men and the cold, professional commands of Lucian's team in the distance, the sound of the approaching battle a promise of imminent salvation or absolute destruction. The door to my cell suddenly slid open, not with a mechanical hiss, but with a clumsy, grinding sound, a testament to the damage the power surge had caused. Elias stood there, his face streaked with dirt and sweat. His eyes still terrified but now holding a flicker of determination. He held a large, rusty pipe in his hand, a pitiful weapon. But the best his former life as a billionaire CEO could provide. I found the auxiliary power panel. Serafina. I overloaded the circuits, but the door is damaged. I can't open the shackles. He gasped, his voice cracking with exhaustion and residual gas. He was not a hero, but a broken man attempting a desperate act of redemption for his years of cruelty. The shackle key is still on Sterling. You need to create a diversion. Elias, draw their fire. Lucian is at the south entrance, I commanded, refusing to offer him praise, only instructions. He hesitated for a split second, looking at the large, rusted pipe in his hand, then at the terror in his immediate future. He looked back at me, his eyes wide, and whispered, I am so sorry, Serafina, for everything. It was the closest he would ever get to a full confession. Elias ran out of the room, banging the pipe against the concrete wall with a loud, ringing clang, a noise designed to draw attention, a pathetic, yet noble sacrifice, just as he disappeared around the corner. Sterling's furious voice echoed back down the hall, dangerously close. The boy is coming with me. Tell Blackwood they can have their whore back, but the son is mine. It's a bad investment they can never recover. My heart seized, the panic returning as I realized Sterling was moving Alexander. The thought of my child being used as currency fueled a sudden, impossible surge of adrenaline. I pulled on the chains with a superhuman strength, the metal digging into my flesh, the blood welling up. The steel cuff on my left wrist suddenly snapped open with a sharp, wrenching crack, the sound of breaking metal signaling the start of the true Blackwood initiation. I tore the remaining chains from my leg and ran out of the cell, dropping the useless metal shackle to the floor. I would save my son, and I would execute Marcus Sterling for his arrogance. The power was mine, and I was fully unleashed. The cold concrete walls of the bunker blurred as I sprinted through the narrow corridors, the urgency fueled by Marcus Sterling's chilling threat that he would use my son, Alexander, as an asset to recover his lost empire. My heart hammered against my ribs, the rhythmic pounding the only measure of time I had left. Knowing that every second lost was a risk to the boy I had sacrificed 2 years of my life to protect. I rounded a tight corner and skidded to a stop. The gruesome sight before me freezing my motion, Elias Thorne lay crumpled against the wall, his face pale and contorted. A sticky, warm substance covering his shirt, where one of Sterling's guards had clearly struck him hard with a blunt object. His pathetic act of redemption ending in brutal, immediate pain. He gasped, his eyes locking onto mine, a look of desperate pain and apology written across his features. The sound of Marcus Sterling's retreating footsteps echoing further down the hall, proving the priority was not Elias, but the endgame. The utility shaft. They are going to the old drainage pipe, near the loading dock. Elias wheezed, his voice barely audible, forcing the critical intelligence out despite the obvious, searing pain in his chest. A final, necessary piece of the puzzle that made the logic of my choice instantly clear. I didn't hesitate, not for a fraction of a second, because the shackle that bound me was Alexander's safety, and the logic was simple. Elias was a damaged piece of evidence that Lucian's team could handle later. My son was irreplaceable. I knelt just long enough to rip the small, customized tracker I had installed into the lining of my own suit, a replica of the one I had planted on Elias earlier, and slapped it firmly onto Elias's unconscious hand, ensuring Lucian would find him immediately. My voice was a cold command, not a promise. Stay alive. Elias, you still owe me information on Eleanor. Yee. With that brutal dismissal, I continued my relentless pursuit of Marcus, leaving the wreckage of my old life behind me. I sprinted toward the loading dock, the distance shrinking, the sound of Sterling's heavy boots and Alexander's small, muffled cry growing clearer. I found Marcus Sterling struggling with a large, rusted hatch near the old freight elevator, holding Alexander tightly under one arm like a piece of merchandise, the platinum ring glinting mockingly on his finger. Two of his men stood guard, their cheap pistols aimed at the hatch, ready to blast their way through the final security measure. Sterling looked up and saw me, his face twisting into a triumphant snarl of cruelty and class contempt. The whore is loose. I knew that pathetic husband of yours couldn't keep you down. Cypher, you're too much of a liability to stay contained, Sterling bellowed, his voice echoing in the chamber. Revealing his total misjudgment, he thought the loss of the ring was my only weakness. You're too late, Serafina. The tunnel is open. You can have your bankrupt company. But I'm taking the boy and the key to ensure my new investment pays off. You can't touch me out here. I have legal immunity in 3 countries. I stopped 10 feet away, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my eyes fixed on my son, then on the platinum band on Sterling's finger. My body was still fighting the lingering effects of the gas and the trauma of the physical blow, but my mind was laser-focused, calculating the precise moment of maximum impact. Immunity. You are joking, Marcus. You think your little offshore shell companies can protect you from the true power of Blackwood. I didn't raise my voice. Instead, I let my tone drop into the cold, technical register of a corporate executioner. My physical position was weak, but my legal and financial position was absolute. You took the ring, Sterling. But you missed the point. That ring was never the key to Blackwood's power. It was the beacon for the real asset, I stated, the logic of my words hitting him like a punch. Watching the confusion cloud his arrogant expression, as I spoke, I calmly raised my left hand, and with my thumb, activated the hidden satellite link in my customized watch, a direct connection to Blackwood's main operational grid. You kidnapped my son, Marcus. That is a level 5 felony involving a minor, not a corporate disagreement. And that overrides every piece of paper you think gives you immunity. Before Sterling could even process the legal threat, his phone, which he had clipped to his jacket pocket, began to ring with a distinct, jarring alarm, a customized alert I recognized from his old portfolio. He frantically pulled it out, his face immediately draining of color as he read the screen. The true instant slap delivered not by my hand, but by technology. What is this? My entire portfolio is frozen. $300 million in assets liquidated in 10 seconds. He shrieked, his voice filled with genuine, unadulterated financial horror, the realization of his new, terrifying reality slamming into him, the number $300 million a crushing weight. That's the $1.2 billion slap. Marcus. The one you tried to avoid 20 years ago. But this time, it's personal. I explained. The satisfaction of delivering the power fantasy palpable. When you touch the ring, a pre-programmed cipher protocol in the chip triggered a cascade failure across your entire shell company structure. You are now being sued for kidnapping, attempted extortion, corporate espionage, and the $300 million you just lost is a down payment on your legal fees, frozen by my new acquisition, the United Trust Bank of Delaware. His face contorted in disbelief. United Trust impossible. That bank owned your father's original debt. They hated Blackwood. Sterling stumbled back, his grip on Alexander loosening slightly in his shock, his eyes darting wildly between me and the flashing alerts on his phone. This was the true twist. I had used the same entity that had tried to destroy my father to destroy him. United Trust was a liability until yesterday. Blackwood Group performed a hostile takeover of their non-performing assets this morning. Marcus, I bought the bank that owns your debt. I stated. The final, undeniable logic of my financial chain locking into place. You are broke, Marcus. You have no legal immunity, and you are currently trespassing on federal property due to the kidnapping felony. Your endgame is over. As I spoke, the heavy steel door to the main corridor burst open with a loud, mechanical crack, and Lucien Moreau, backed by two heavily armed Blackwood agents, stormed into the chamber. Their weapons instantly raised and aimed at Sterling and his men, the noise of their arrival amplifying the climax. This was the synchronized, perfect execution of the Blackwood initiation. Sterling, realizing the full scale of the legal and financial trap, instinctively threw Alexander away from himself, pushing the child roughly onto the cold floor as he frantically tried to discard the ring and flee toward the open drainage pipe, his self-preservation winning over his desire for revenge. The ring is yours. Take it, I'll file bankruptcy, he yelled, his voice desperate. I ignored Sterling's panicked retreat, my eyes fixed only on my son. I lunged forward, sliding across the concrete floor to scoop Alexander into my arms, the small, warm weight of him the only thing that mattered in the entire universe. I held him tightly, burying my face in his hair. The years of cold, calculated endurance instantly melting away, replaced by the fierce, protective instinct of a mother who had just reclaimed her world. Lucian's voice, cold and precise, cut through the tension. Secure the target and the asset. Blackwood is closing the exit. Sterling's guards were instantly subdued, but Marcus himself had squeezed halfway into the drainage pipe, attempting his final, futile escape. I held Alexander close, the fear in my son's eyes slowly receding as he recognized the cold calm in my gaze. I looked up at the pathetic form of Marcus Sterling, trapped like a rat in the pipe. I did not need to waste another bullet or another word. My victory was absolute, legal, and televised. Mommy, bad man go to jail, Alexander whispered into my neck, his voice small but firm. The simple, honest statement, a final, perfect closure. The warmth of Alexander in my arms was the only thing grounding me in the grim reality of the bunker. The fear momentarily eclipsed by the fierce satisfaction of having defeated Marcus Sterling and reclaimed my son. The bad man is going to jail. Sweetie, Mommy promises. I whispered into his hair, before turning to Lucien, my face instantly hardening back into the cold precision of cipher. Sterling's assets are frozen, but his capture doesn't end this. We need Eleanor. She has the final piece of the puzzle regarding my father's death, and she's a loose end Blackwood cannot afford. I handed Alexander to Lucian, the exchange swift and professional. Even as my mother's heart tore slightly at the necessary separation. Get him out. Lucian. Secure him with the Alpha team. I'll handle the cleanup and Elias. Lucian didn't argue. He simply nodded, acknowledging the ruthless logic of the situation. Alexander's safety was paramount, and my pursuit of Eleanor was a non-negotiable mission. I turned back toward the dark corridors, the metallic scent of blood leading me back to where I had left Elias, the man who had been my jailer, my puppet, and, ultimately, my unwilling accomplice. I found him exactly where I had left him, slumped against the wall, his breathing shallow and ragged, the internal bleeding from the blow visibly worsening. He was a liability to be managed, but a necessary one, as he held the key to Eleanor's escape. Eleanor, she's at the retreat. Elias rasped, his eyes barely fluttering open as he sensed my presence, cutting straight to the information I needed. His desperation for survival overriding any residual loyalty to his mother. The old hunting lodge, near the upstate border. She has a server farm hidden there. The original flight logs. The ones that prove she paid the mechanic to tamper with the brakes. It all links back to the Silverstream deal. He was giving me everything: the location, the proof, and the motive. He coughed. A painful, wet sound. She knew I would try to stop her. She told me, if anything happened, tell them I was unstable, that you attacked me, for the insurance. His final, desperate confession revealed Eleanor's ultimate plan to use the chaos of the bunker and Elias's serious injuries to frame me for attempted murder. The final, vicious iteration of the asylum trap playing out on the public stage. The logic was perverse but brilliant. No one would believe the word of a gold digger who had just liquidated her husband's company and whose ex-husband was now lying in critical condition. Eleanor, the corporate criminal, was trying to transform herself into the sympathetic victim of a mentally unstable, money-hungry ex-wife. You need a hospital, Elias, now, I stated, pulling out my phone, not to call the police, but to call Blackwood's specialized medical response unit. I'm giving you a chance for life. Elias, not forgiveness, but life. If you die here, Eleanor wins, and she'll walk free to kill again. He looked up at me, his eyes pleading. Promise me, Serafina. Don't let them kill her. Let the law judge her, not Blackwood liquidation. He wasn't seeking to save her, but to assert a final moral logic over his own guilt, a desire for true, legal justice rather than the corporate execution I specialized in. I looked at him, recognizing the flicker of true regret beneath the pain. The law will handle Eleanor, Elias. I won't turn her into a martyr, but I won't slow down the FBI either. The Blackwood medical team arrived quickly and silently, their professionalism a soothing contrast to the raw drama, as they stabilized Elias and prepared to move him. My phone buzzed with a notification Eleanor's PR team had launched their preemptive strike. A headline flashed across the screen: Bankrupt ex-wife attacks Elias Thorne in attempted murder-suicide. The media was already parroting her narrative, using the public shaming to cement my image as a dangerous, volatile criminal. They've spun the whole story. Serafina, you're the one who beat him, who framed Marcus, who caused the corporate collapse through sheer madness, Lucian reported, returning to my side after securing Alexander. The police will be here in minutes. The logic dictates you must disappear. I looked at the cameras strategically placed on the transport gurney as Elias was wheeled away. knowing Eleanor's people would be monitoring the feeds. I had to counter the narrative immediately, but I couldn't use words. I needed action that defied the unstable woman stereotype. I calmly pulled the platinum ring, the retrieved teen vat, off my finger and threw it onto the concrete floor near the bloodied area. A deliberate, calculated gesture of indifference to the gold they thought I coveted. Then, I turned to Lucian, my face cold and decisive. Eleanor wants me to run and hide. That's what a liability would do. Instead, we go directly to her server farm. I need the flight logs now. Before she can clean up the evidence. She thinks she's in the retreat. I'm going to make it her prison. Just as I prepared to leave, a police siren wailed in the distance, closer now, indicating the arrival of the NYPD. Summoned by Eleanor's carefully crafted narrative, I looked at the dark exit. The choice, immediate and dangerous escape and preserve my innocence, or confront Eleanor and risk being arrested as a murder suspect. I didn't blink. Let them come. Lucian, Blackwood doesn't run from its problems. We liquidate them. I slipped into the waiting armored Blackwood SUV, my hands already flying across a secure keyboard, remotely locking down the nearest private airfield that Eleanor would attempt to use for her final escape. I knew the moment Elias entered the hospital. His mother's final, lethal trap would be fully set. My only chance was to dismantle her evidence before the law caught up to her lies. The Blackwood armored SUV tore through the heavy upstate New York fog, the headlights barely cutting through the dense gray as we approached the retreat. Eleanor Thorne's final stronghold, a secluded compound where she had stored the flight logs, proving she rigged the plane crash that killed my father. Eleanor had initiated her final, vicious counterattack, painting me as the emotionally unstable brute who had nearly beaten her son to death, cementing the asylum trap in the public mind, forcing me into a position where I was hunted by both the law and my own fury. I stared at the tactical display on the console, my fingers flying over the keyboard, already executing a localized electronic denial of service, attempting to cripple the compound's communication lines before we even breached the perimeter. The logic demanding swift, decisive action to counter her legal maneuvering. Eleanor has hired 3 private security contractors, former military. Serafina, this is a fortress, not a retreat. She's anticipating Blackwood, but she thinks we're coming in a corporate car, not an armored vehicle with an EMP pulse, Lucian reported, his hand steady on the wheel as he navigated the treacherous, unpaved driveway, the urgency of the situation palpable. The security logic is based on physical intimidation and delaying tactics. We need to disable the primary generator and find the server farm before she initiates the data liquidation. She won't liquidate the data digitally. Lucian, that leaves a trace. She will burn it. She's old school. And she's terrified, I countered, my eyes scanning the thermal imaging feed, spotting the 3 armed men posted at the main gate. The sight of armed men protecting the killer of my father sent a cold, clinical wave of rage through me, a ruthless focus that pushed away the pain of Elias's betrayal and the ongoing threat to my reputation. I needed those logs to secure the legal justice Elias had begged for, to prove that Eleanor was not the victim, but a calculating murderer motivated by corporate greed during the Silverstream deal. I activated the external comms, the sound a sharp, commanding burst over the compound speakers. This is Serafina Vance, CEO of Blackwood Group. Evacuate the premises immediately. You are harboring a fugitive wanted for homicide and corporate fraud. Your employment contract is now void. I didn't wait for a response. My words were merely the legal preface to the physical assault. The mercenaries reacted instantly, opening fire on our position, the muffled pop of the rifles hitting the armored chassis, shaking the vehicle but failing to penetrate the reinforced shell. They won't back down. Eleanor offered them a significant bonus if they clean up the problem before dawn, Lucian stated, accelerating toward the flimsy gate. Hold on, Serafina. The SUV smashed through the gate with a sickening crunch, the twisted metal flying into the dark woods as we sped toward the main lodge. I jumped out the moment the vehicle stopped, moving with the trained precision of the cipher, the years of physical conditioning kicking in, ignoring the dull ache of the sedative still in my system. The three mercenaries split up, creating a deadly triangle of crossfire, their movements predictable and slow compared to Blackwood's training protocols. I didn't engage in a prolonged gunfight. Instead, I used the environment and my technical superiority. I pulled two small, specialized EMP grenades from my suit pocket and threw them in opposite directions, timing the short fuse perfectly. The explosions were not loud, just sharp bursts of blinding white light and a massive electronic surge. The mercenaries' advanced comms and night vision goggles instantly short-circuited, blinding them in the darkness they relied on. The moment their specialized gear failed, they became easy targets, their confusion echoing in the sudden silence. I darted past them, utilizing the one weakness of brute strength, poor agility. The server farm is under the main study, accessed by a false bookshelf, the one holding the old Thorne family photo albums. Elias's earlier information echoed in my mind, a final, grudging piece of useful intelligence. I entered the lodge, the expensive Persian rugs and antique furniture a stark reminder of the crumbling aristocracy I was liquidating. I followed the faint, acrid smell of burning paper, a scent that confirmed my theory Eleanor was trying to destroy the hard evidence now that her media attack was failing to stop me. I burst into the grand study, the room filled with the orange glow of a roaring fireplace. Eleanor Thorne stood before the hearth, her elegant silk dressing gown illuminated by the flames, her face a mask of triumph and pure, unadulterated madness. She held a thick, leather-bound folder the flight logs and was tearing pages out one by one, feeding them to the hungry fire, a desperate attempt to erase her crime, the false bookshelf, identified by a small, gleaming lock on its side, stood open, revealing the steel door to the underground server vault. You're too late, Serafina. The liability finally lost. The paper evidence is gone. No logs. No proof. No jury will believe the word of a corporate thief and a raving lunatic. Eleanor shrieked, her voice high-pitched and hysterical, dropping the burning remains of the logs onto the marble floor. She was attempting to use the asylum trap right to my face, hoping to break my composure and make me appear unstable. I walked toward her, slowly and deliberately, my eyes focused only on the smoke-filled remains of the evidence. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I looked at the marble floor, where a few pages had fallen just short of the flames. You are correct, Eleanor. Paper burns, I said, my voice dangerously calm, the control terrifying in the face of her hysteria. But the data in the server vault, the digital copy of the logs you stored as an extra layer of protection, does it burn as easily? Eleanor froze, the last page of the logbook half torn in her hand, her mouth dropping open in shock. Her logic failure was complete. She had focused all her energy on destroying the physical evidence, forgetting the digital backup she had created out of her own paranoid need for redundancy, believing the digital evidence was safe in the sealed server room. She dropped the remaining logs and lunged past me, scrambling toward the open bookshelf, desperate to seal the vault and delete the digital trail. You won't touch my vault. You won't take my power. This is my empire, and you are just a damaged good, she screamed, her fingernails scratching uselessly at the steel doorframe, trying to pull the heavy bookshelf shut. I grabbed her from behind, not to hurt her, but to restrain her. My superior training instantly overwhelming her desperate, civilian strength. The empire is gone, Eleanor. I liquidated it 2 days ago, and the digital logs have already been copied, I stated. The finality of the statement a crushing weight. I pushed her away from the door and activated the tiny, sophisticated Blackwood decryption device I had already planted beneath the server shelf during my rapid assessment. The device blinked green. The logic was now absolute, the evidence was secure. Eleanor turned to face me, her eyes filled with cold, murderous hatred. She grabbed a heavy, bronze antique statue from the mantelpiece, a symbol of the Thorne family's long-dead power, and swung it wildly at my head. I ducked just in time, the statue hitting the stone wall with a dull thud that sent shards of marble flying. This was the final, desperate physical conflict. The last gasp of the old. Arrogant power against the new. Ruthless control. Lucian burst into the room, his weapon drawn, ready to engage the threat. Serafina, she's armed, back away. I ignored him. My eyes locked on Eleanor, who was now weeping, her hysterical rage finally giving way to utter defeat. I didn't need Lucian's gun, and I didn't need her death. I needed her alive, legally bound and utterly ruined. I took one final step toward the woman who had murdered my father and ruined my life, my voice dropping to a low, chilling whisper that promised a punishment far worse than death. You don't get to burn the evidence. Eleanor, you don't get to disappear. I own your crime now. And when the FBI walks in, they won't find a burning pile of paper. They'll find you. A woman wanted for murder and fraud, and a full digital backup of every single one of your lies, perfectly time-stamped, waiting to be used for your public and legal execution. The smell of ozone and burnt wood from the retreat still clung to my clothes as Lucian and I reviewed the final strategy in the armored SUV. The digital flight log secured on a Blackwood server. The victory felt absolute. Eleanor was physically neutralized, the evidence of my father's murder secured. And Marcus Sterling was behind bars. But the media frenzy, fueled by Eleanor's insidious asylum trap narrative that painted me as a violent sociopath who had brutalized Elias, still raged. A final, structural flaw I needed to liquidate publicly. The police have issued a warrant for your arrest, Serafina. They found the scene at the bunker. And Elias's serious injuries validate Eleanor's story that you were emotionally unstable, Lucian stated, his voice tight. The threat of legal jeopardy very real, proving that in America, reputation and perception were just as lethal as any bullet. Eleanor underestimated 2 things: my technical reach and Elias's guilt. I responded, my gaze fixed on the hospital's media feed, where dozens of reporters were camped out, waiting for news on the billionaire victim. I have the digital logs, which prove a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme tied to the Silverstream deal. And that fraud is the only motive for murder. The crime is economic, not emotional. I need to present the logic of the case, not the theatrics. I handed Lucian the decrypted files. Release this data packet to the FBI's Special White Collar Division and the New York Attorney General simultaneously. But hold the homicide logs. Let the fraud charges stick first. We need to create the maximum legal pressure. The core logic of the counterattack was simple change, the narrative from spousal abuse to corporate crime. Within minutes, the media headlines began to shift. The initial shock of Serafina Vance murder suspect giving way to Thorne family under federal investigation for multi-million-dollar fraud. The financial crime was the leverage, the evidence that justified my 2 years of endured humiliation and the swift, hostile takeover. But the physical assault charge still lingered, the final piece of the asylum trap waiting to spring. We arrived at the private wing of the Manhattan Hospital. Lucian's team clearing a path through the frenzied media. I walked into Elias's room. The sterile white environment a stark contrast to the gothic chaos of the past few hours. He was hooked up to monitors, pale and weak, but awake. He looked at me, not with fear, but with a strange mix of resignation and profound shame. He had survived his pathetic act of redemption. My mother, she won't stop. Serafina, she keeps calling the hospital, trying to convince the doctor to confirm my psychological distress and that you were the attacker. Elias whispered, his breathing shallow, yet the urgency in his voice was clear. He knew his mother's final card was to tarnish my name beyond repair. She told them, I should blame you for the liquidation, that you are a menace. She already did. Elias. The world thinks I beat you senseless for the insurance, I replied, my eyes cold, refusing to offer comfort. Your mother gave you life, but she has chosen to use the law to make you her final liability. I upheld my promise I didn't let Marcus kill you. Now, you uphold yours. The flight logs are secure, but the only person who can neutralize the assault charge and dismantle the media narrative is you. Elias looked at the ceiling, his mind racing, grappling with the agonizing choice between familial loyalty and his own guilt. He knew that if he lied, I would release the homicide evidence against Eleanor without mercy, destroying her publicly and politically. If he told the truth, he would be betraying his mother, but he would also clear his conscience and ensure his own legal safety from the accessory to murder charge. He reached for the call button for the nurse, his hand trembling. I want to make a public statement. Now, get the cameras in here, he instructed the nurse, his voice weak but firm. A final, agonizing decision made. The room instantly filled with the harsh glare of camera lights and the buzzing of recording devices. The media frenzy now focused on his hospital bed. Elias looked straight into the camera lens, his face pale and bruised, a living testament to the violence of the last 24 hours, and delivered the one piece of testimony that could break Eleanor's final trap. My mother, Eleanor Thorne, is the one who hired the mechanic to tamper with the plane's brakes 3 years ago, causing the accident that killed Serafina's father. I was involved only in the subsequent cover-up of her financial fraud. The fraud that destroyed Thorne Consolidated, he stated. The words a hammer blow to the foundation of their family name. The truth about my injury: I was not attacked by Serafina Vance. I was attacked by Marcus Sterling's security detail after attempting to expose my mother's long-standing criminal activities. The news instantly became the ultimate plot twist in the scandal, transforming me from the raving lunatic to the whistleblower's victim. The dramatic shift satisfying the audience's need for righteous justice. Elias had completed his final, painful act of redemption, sacrificing his mother's freedom for his own soul. After the media was cleared and the silence returned, I stood over Elias, the moment heavy with the ghosts of our failed marriage. You kept your word, Elias. That is the only piece of capital you have left. I reached into my coat and pulled out a single, plain document, not a court summons, but a simple contract. This is a non-disclosure agreement. You are legally bound never to speak of me, my son, Alexander, or Blackwood Group again. You will keep the silence of a man who never existed. Elias nodded, his gaze dull. What happens to me? I have nothing left. Serafina, no company, no family, no friends. He was broken, utterly liquidated. I signed the NDA and placed it on his bedside table. You will be transferred to a private facility in Switzerland, one of Blackwood's offshore investments, where you will receive the best medical care and live a life of comfortable irrelevance. You will never be poor, but you will never be powerful again, I declared, my voice a final, surgical pronouncement of his fate. That is your permanent sentence. You are no longer a liability. You are just a memory that Blackwood is maintaining. I wasn't cruel. I was simply upholding the ultimate logic of the market. He was a decommissioned asset, and I was granting him a golden parachute into oblivion. A far better fate than he had deserved. I turned and walked to the door, my mission complete. The scent of the hospital air already fading as I thought about my next move. Serafina, Elias whispered, his voice catching. The ring. The one you threw. Why? Why would you leave billions on the floor? I paused at the threshold, looking back at the man who had briefly owned me, a man who still couldn't grasp the true currency of power. The platinum ring was merely a lockpick. Elias. It was a tool. I don't covet tools. I covet the power that makes the tools. The Blackwood Group headquarters, a glass monolith towering over Manhattan, felt less like an office and more like a fortress of solitude, the perfect stage for my final, calculated move. 2 days had passed since Elias's public testimony destroyed Eleanor's final asylum trap and confirmed her guilt in my father's murder. And now, the world viewed me, Serafina Vance, not as the gold digger or the lunatic, but as the ruthless, self-made CEO who had engineered the most devastating corporate liquidation in recent memory. I stood in my father's former office, the air thick with the faint scent of old leather and untapped power, watching Lucian systematically destroy every lingering digital trace of the Thorn era. The logic of the moment was clear, the immediate threats were neutralized. But the true game, the protection of Blackwood and Alexander, had only just begun. Eleanor Thorne is in federal custody. Serafina, facing homicide and 3 counts of fraud. Marcus Sterling is being extradited. Veronica is merely a forgotten headline, and Elias is safely en route to the Swiss facility. Rendered completely irrelevant, Lucian reported, his voice crisp and professional, listing the terminated threats like checked items on a ledger. I nodded. The efficiency satisfying, yet the warning from Marcus Sterling still echoed in my mind. A subtle, cold threat. Blackwood isn't yours. We're coming for the ring. And the boy. Sterling had been talking about an asset he intended to exchange. Not just the physical platinum ring, which was now safely locked away as a relic. He had been talking about another key. A hidden weakness. I walked to the secure terminal and pulled up my father's last will and testament. The complex, multi-layered document that had orchestrated my 2 years of suffering and my ultimate triumph. The platinum ring was merely the digital key to the primary inheritance, Lucian. But my father was too paranoid to rely on one lock. He always hid a second failsafe, a final hidden asset that Marcus Sterling knew about. I zoomed in on a specific clause deep within the will, a section concerning the transfer of control. It stated that upon my 25th birthday and the successful transfer of the primary key, a dormant, minority share 2% of Blackwood's controlling interest would be automatically activated and transferred to an undisclosed proxy designated as the regulator. The regulator 2% is enough to cause catastrophic damage in a hostile takeover, enough to destabilize the market and force us to liquidate assets. Lucian frowned, instantly grasping the chilling implications of the twist. This wasn't external conflict. This was a viper hidden in the very foundation of the Blackwood Empire. Why would your father leave a ticking time bomb inside the company, right after ensuring your control? Because my father was paranoid. Lucian. He wanted a final test. He wanted to ensure that if I survived the Thorn test, I was strong enough to face the internal threat. I explained, the logic of the extreme security measures now terrifyingly apparent. My father had been testing me with my own company's stability. Sterling wasn't after the physical ring, he was after the regulator's identity. Knowing that person could veto my control, I brought up the encrypted file linked to the regulator's designation. The file was complex, protected by multiple firewalls, forcing me to shift from CEO to cipher one last time. My fingers flew across the keyboard, bypassing the layers of corporate security and old-world encryption, the raw adrenaline of the pursuit returning. But this time, the enemy was faceless, hidden in the very network I now controlled. The screen flickered, the firewall collapsing under my concentrated attack. The designation resolved not to a single person, but to a shell corporation, Orion Ventures. The same shell corporation Elias had unknowingly used to borrow the $1.2 billion from Blackwood. The company that had initiated the margin call that destroyed Thorne Consolidated. Orion Ventures. That was my father's old shadow company. The one he used for his dirtiest deals. But it's linked to a person. Lucian. A lawyer he trusted. I muttered, recalling the complex, bitter logic of my father's past. I clicked the final layer of decryption, the ultimate revelation flashing onto the screen. The name, a jarring, painful shock that made my victorious stance crumble for the first time. The regulator was listed as Lucian Moreau. The room fell into a terrifying silence, broken only by the whirring of the cooling fans. I slowly turned to face my most trusted ally, the man who had risked his life repeatedly to protect me, the man who had secured Alexander's safety, the chief operating officer of Blackwood, now revealed as the true, final hidden asset with the power to veto my command. Lucian stood perfectly still, his face impassive, his eyes betraying nothing, confirming the devastating truth he had been playing the long game longer than I had. The regulator, 2% of the voting power, enough to demand the full liquidation of any new venture I propose, enough to veto my decision to keep Alexander safe, I stated, my voice dangerously even, cutting through the shock. You were meant to monitor my success, Lucian, to ensure I was worthy of the name Blackwood, and if I failed, you were supposed to take control and clean up the mess. Lucian finally broke the silence, his face softening only slightly with a flicker of respect. Not guilt. It was your father's final logic. Serafina, he knew you were impulsive. The 2% was an absolute lock, a safety net. The moment you proved you were Cypher by defeating the Thorns and retrieving the ring, the power was meant to be shared. If you had failed, I would have taken the boy, eliminated Elias, and secured Blackwood from the inside. He reached into his coat, not for a weapon, but for a small, simple envelope. Congratulations on passing the test. Serafina, you are the CEO. He handed me the envelope. This is a pre-signed transfer agreement, effective immediately. I relinquished the 2%. I was your father's liability, and now I am yours. What is your command? CEO Vance. The speed and ruthlessness of his surrender confirmed his loyalty. But the sheer shock of the betrayal logic was something I wouldn't soon forget. I took the envelope, the paper crisp and final, and instantly tore the document into 2 pieces. No, Lucian, you are not a liability. You are my only ally who truly understands the logic of ruthlessness, I declared, my eyes hardening, not toward him, but toward the invisible, lurking threats that still surrounded Blackwood. I walked back to the center of the office, looking out at the glittering, cold city that was now mine, completely unchained. You will not relinquish the 2%. Lucian, you will remain the regulator, because now the rules change, I commanded, the final structure of my new empire locking into place. We have destroyed the Thorns, but the game of corporate espionage is eternal. They will come for Alexander, for Blackwood, and for the 2% they think they can use to destabilize us. But they will never find the weakness if they cannot locate the true power. I turned back to him, my voice carrying the weight of the billions I now commanded. The full realization of the power fantasy finally attained. The 2% remains with you. Elias Thorne is in Switzerland, my ex-husband. A man rendered irrelevant to everyone except as a permanent decoy. From now on, the world will believe the regulator is Elias Thorne, that the 2% is his silent revenge. You will run the network, and I will be the face of the public fight. I sat down in my father's old executive chair, the leather cold and firm beneath me, the scent of power overwhelming the residual fear. The final clean slate is complete. Lucian, the debt is paid. The gold digger is dead. Long live the cipher. The game is not over. It has simply evolved. I looked out at the city, the cold, silent promise of more battles to come hanging heavy in the air. Now, Lucian, what is the next liability we need to liquidate?